Who drained Russia's vast Aral Sea? So let's get right to it. The answer to the question is the former Soviet Union. That's who. The Aral Sea is actually situated in Central Asia, between northern Uzbekistan and southern Kazakhstan. Once the fourth largest freshwater lake in the world, the vanishing Aral Sea is now nearly empty, thanks to a decades-old Soviet-begun desert irrigation program. The Aral Sea once had a surface area of over 26,000 square miles, or 67,000 square kilometers. It was circled with booming Kazakh and Uzbek towns living off a thriving fishing industry of carp, flounder, and catfish. It provided over 40,000 jobs and supplied the Soviet Union with a sixth of its fish. The Aral Sea is fed by two of Central Asia's mightiest rivers, the Amur Darya and the Sir Darya, both originating in the snowy Himalayas before flowing north, crossing a desert, and entering the Aral Sea. In the 1960s, the Soviet government, led by Premier Nikita Khrushchev, decided to turn that vast desert steppe into farmland. So, over the next decade, they built an enormous irrigation network, including 45 dams, 80 reservoirs, and 20,000 miles of irrigation canals, all to irrigate the Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan desert, turning it into sprawling fields of cotton and wheat. But the Soviet system was very poorly engineered from the start. Much of the water meant for the Aral Sea leaked out of those canals and never made it in. So not only was water being diverted to farmland at the expense of the sea, the majority was soaked up by the desert and wasted. Under normal conditions, the Aral Sea gets about a fifth of its water from rainfall and the rest from those two big Himalayan rivers. Without the river flow, evaporation caused the water level to decrease faster than the amount that trickled in, causing the vast sea to slowly dry up. In the decades that followed, the Aral Sea was slowly starved of its water source and reduced to a handful of smaller lakes, with a volume 1/10 the original size. As a consequence, the salinity of these remaining lakes increased due to evaporation, causing most of the fish that had either survived or had been attempted to be reintroduced in the 1990s to all die. As a result, millions of Aral fish perished over the next decades. The long coastlines receded miles and miles from those fishing towns, leaving boats to rust on a now dry lake bed. Those Kazakhs who remained were plagued by dust storms that contained toxic fertilizers and pesticides used by the Soviets. Herds of antelope vanished. Children of the fishermen moved away in search of jobs in the city elsewhere. Where once you could sail from town to town, now you could literally drive across the dry lake bed. Fisheries and those villages that depended on them collapsed like gold rush ghost towns. The increasing salty water became polluted with the dust-blown fertilizer and pesticides. The salty dust also blew off the dry lake bed and settled onto those farm fields, degrading the soil. Farmlands had to be flushed with even greater volumes of river water to compensate. It was a vicious cycle the Soviet government was unwilling to stop, and later Uzbekistan has since continued. Other dramatic consequences include the response by Mother Nature to man's intervention. The loss of such a large body of water made winters colder and summers drier. The blowing contaminated dust from the exposed lake bed became a public health hazard for the millions of people still living in those two regions. These include a rise in infant mortality rates, a decrease in life expectancy, and an increase in kidney and liver disease, respiratory infections, and birth defects. By the year 2000, the lake had separated into the smaller North Aral Sea in Kazakhstan and the larger South Aral Sea in Uzbekistan. The Southern Sea has further split into western and eastern lung-shaped lobes as it continued to dry up. By 2001, the southern lobe's water connection had been severed. The shallower eastern part retreated rapidly when drought cut off the flow of the Amur Darya River completely. In 2014, the eastern lobe of the South Aral Sea completely disappeared. The remaining western lobe is a salty, toxic turquoise instead of deep blue. 90% of the once massive lake is now gone. Google Earth will show you that the southern basin of the once huge lake is now almost completely dry. In a last-ditch effort to save the smaller northern lake, Kazakhstan and the World Bank built a dam between the northern and southern parts of the Aral Sea. The Aral Dam, finished in 2005, prevents flow out of the North Aral Sea into the lower south. The dam has led fisheries in the North Aral to rebound as water levels rose again, though to the detriment of the South Aral Sea. So what lessons does our man-made manipulation of the Aral Sea teach us? For the future, the difficulty lies in we humans being capable of predicting the consequences of such massive actions before we undertake them. Our ecosystem is more fragile than we think. It must be at the forefront of any decision we make before we commit to such large-scale actions, for these too often result in even larger, deadly consequences for our beloved planet Earth.